The metal chair creaked under Kethvar's weight as he shifted uncomfortably in the small room aboard the Coalition mothership Nexus Prime. His reptilian scales caught the harsh light from overhead as he stared across the table at Commander Lisa Brooks. The human woman sat perfectly still with her hands folded and her dark eyes fixed on his face. 3 days had passed since his capture, and Kethvar still could not believe he was here. The mighty Zephyrian Empire had sent him, and nearly 1 million warriors to conquer what their intelligence called a primitive backwater species. Now he sat alone as the only high-ranking survivor willing to talk. Commander Brooks leaned forward slightly and activated the recording device between them. Her voice was calm and professional when she spoke, but Kethvar could see something else in her eyes that made his stomach turn with an emotion he had never felt before the war with humans began. It was pity. State your name and rank for the record. She said, I am Kethvar of the Third Claw, and former strike commander of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet, he replied. His voice came out as a harsh whisper. The vocal cords in his throat had been damaged during the final battle above Earth when human fighters had somehow penetrated their flagship's defenses. You commanded assault forces during the invasion of human space. Brooks continued. Yes. Tell me about your orders. Kethvar closed his eyes and tried to push away the memories that haunted his sleep. When he opened them again, Brooks was still watching him with that terrible, patient expression. We were told it would be simple, he began. The humans were divided into hundreds of small nations that fought among themselves constantly. They had no unified military, and their weapons were primitive compared to ours. High Command estimated 6 months for complete subjugation. What changed your assessment? The question hung in the air like smoke. Kethvar felt his claws extend involuntarily as his mind drifted back to those first horrifying weeks. Your species does not fight like any creature in the known galaxy, he said slowly. We have conquered 47 worlds and enslaved dozens of intelligent species. They all follow the same pattern when faced with superior force. They calculate losses and surrender when defeat becomes inevitable. Some fight bravely, but they fight to win, and when winning becomes impossible, they stop fighting. Brooks remained silent and waited for him to continue. Humans are different, Kethvar whispered. You do not fight to win. You fight to ensure your enemy loses everything. The words came easier now, as if speaking them aloud might somehow purge them from his memory. I volunteered for the human campaign because I thought it would bring easy glory. I had led successful operations against the crystalline hegemony and the void touched. Those victories earned me recognition and promotion. The human assignment seemed like another stepping stone to higher rank. Our intelligence reports painted humans as weak and disorganized, he continued. You were described as emotional creatures driven by primitive instincts. Your technology was centuries behind ours, and your military doctrine was supposedly based on outdated concepts of honor and heroism that would crumble against modern warfare. Brooks's expression had not changed, but something flickered in her eyes. When he mentioned honor and heroism, the first phase went exactly as planned, Kethvar said. Our advanced scouts reported that human military forces were scattered across your territory with no apparent coordination. Your space defenses were minimal and easily overwhelmed. We established orbital supremacy around 12 human worlds within the first week. But the ground campaigns were different. Yes. The word came out like a hiss. Everything changed when we landed troops. Kethvar remembered the excitement he had felt watching the dropships descend toward the first human world. New Harmony was supposed to be a simple agricultural colony with no military installations and a population of farmers and settlers. Intelligence estimated resistance would collapse within hours of the first demonstration of Zephyrian firepower. We expected the humans to surrender when they saw our superior weapons and numbers, he said. Instead, they did something none of our previous enemies had ever done. What was that? They smiled. The memory sent a chill through Kethvar's body. Even now, sitting in this sterile room surrounded by Coalition security, he could still see the face of the first human he had encountered on New Harmony. An elderly man with white hair and wrinkled skin who had stepped out of his farmhouse holding an ancient projectile weapon. The old human had looked up at Kethvar's dropship and actually smiled before raising his weapon. "That old farmer killed 6 of my warriors before we brought him down," Kethvar said. As he died, he was still smiling, and he said something in his language that our translators picked up. What did he say? "Welcome to hell." Brooks wrote something in her notes, but her expression remained neutral. Kethvar envied her ability to control her emotions. Since the war ended, he had lost that skill entirely. The pattern repeated itself across every landing zone, he continued. Humans who should have been terrified instead seemed almost happy to see us. They fought with weapons that were laughably primitive by our standards, but they used them with a skill and determination that defied logic. Our doctrine assumes that any rational being will preserve their own life when possible, Kethvar explained. Sacrifice is acceptable when it serves a greater purpose, but meaningless death is avoided. Humans seem to view death differently. They treated it as just another weapon in their arsenal. The confession session continued for hours, but Kethvar's mind kept returning to that first day on New Harmony. The smiling farmer who had welcomed them to hell had been right in ways the Zephyrian Empire was only beginning to understand. Commander Brooks refilled her coffee cup and settled back into her chair as Kethvar continued his testimony. The alien warrior's scales had shifted to a darker shade, which she had learned indicated distress among his species. "Tell me about New Harmony," she said. Kethvar's claws scraped against the metal table as his hands clenched. "New Harmony was supposed to prove human weakness," he began. 50,000 of our finest shock troops against a farming settlement with no military defenses. High Command chose it specifically because victory would be so overwhelming that other human worlds would surrender rather than face the same fate. The transport ships had descended through New Harmony's atmosphere like falling stars. Kethvar remembered the view from his command dropship as the planet's surface grew larger below them. Green fields stretched to the horizon, dotted with small settlements and farming complexes. It looked peaceful and defenseless. "Our battle plan was simple," he continued. "Overwhelming force applied quickly to break human morale before they could organize resistance. We would capture key infrastructure intact and use the surviving population as examples for other worlds." What happened instead? Everything went wrong from the moment we landed. The first sign of trouble had come from Strike Team Alpha, assigned to secure the main settlement. Their target was a cluster of buildings around what appeared to be a grain storage facility. Intelligence indicated it housed roughly 200 humans engaged in agricultural processing. Team Alpha landed 1 kilometer from their objective and began their approach in standard formation, Kethvar said. The terrain was open farmland with excellent visibility and no apparent cover for defenders. It should have been a textbook operation, but as the Zephyrian warriors advanced toward the settlement, they discovered that the humans had not fled as expected. Instead, someone had positioned themselves in the large grain silo that dominated the complex. The sniper fire began when Alpha Team reached the outer buildings, Kethvar explained. Single precise shots from an elevated position. Our warriors took cover and called for heavy weapons support, but the human marksmen seemed to anticipate our movements. The defender in the silo was a farmer named Jake Morrison, according to Intercepted Communications. He had no military training and was using a hunting rifle designed for killing local wildlife. Yet he held off an entire Zephyrian platoon for 6 hours. Morrison's weapon was primitive, Kethvar admitted. It fired simple projectiles with chemical propellants. Our armor should have provided complete protection, but somehow his shots found weak points in our suits. He targeted joints and sensor arrays with impossible accuracy. As the siege continued, Morrison began using improvised explosives made from agricultural chemicals. When Zephyrian warriors tried to storm the silo, they discovered he had booby-trapped. Every approach with devices created from fertilizer and fuel. We lost 17 warriors trying to reach him, Cathvar said. Each time we developed a new approach, Morrison adapted his tactics. He seemed to understand our equipment better than our own technicians. The most disturbing aspect was Morrison's communication with other human settlements. Instead of calling for help or evacuation, he broadcast tactical advice about fighting Zephyrian forces. He described weak points in their armor and suggested improvised weapons other humans could create. He was teaching your species how to kill us, Cathvar whispered. Similar scenes played out across New Harmony as other strike teams encountered unexpected resistance. An elderly woman named Helen Carter had converted her kitchen into a chemical weapons laboratory using household cleaning supplies. She created clouds of toxic gas that forced Zephyrian warriors to retreat, despite their protective gear. Carter was over 70 years old, Cathvar said. She should have been helpless against armed soldiers, but she understood chemistry in ways our scientists had not anticipated. The compounds she created were specifically designed to corrode our equipment. In the Southern District, a teenager named Alex Rodriguez led a group of children in guerrilla attacks using farm machinery as weapons. They modified harvesting equipment into mobile weapons platforms and used their knowledge of local terrain to strike at Zephyrian supply lines. Rodriguez was 16 years old, Cathvar continued. The children following him were even younger. They should have been evacuated or hidden by the adults, but instead they became combatants. Your species arms its young and sends them into battle. The pattern repeated across every landing zone on New Harmony. Humans who should have surrendered or fled instead fought with desperate creativity. They turned everyday objects into weapons and used their knowledge of local conditions to maximum advantage. What disturbed us most was their coordination, Cathvar explained. Despite having no military command structure, the humans shared information and adapted their tactics in real time. Each successful defense was immediately broadcast to other settlements. The breakthrough in Morrison's silo came when Zephyrian forces finally brought orbital bombardment to bear. The grain storage facility collapsed under heavy fire, but Morrison continued shooting until the structure completely crumbled. When we searched the ruins, we found his body, Cathvar said. He had taken 43 of our warriors with him, 43 trained soldiers killed by one farmer with a hunting rifle. But Morrison's death did not end the resistance. Instead, it seemed to inspire the surviving humans to fight even harder. They began using suicide tactics that no Zephyrian strategist had anticipated. The concept was alien to us, Cathvar admitted. Sacrifice for strategic advantage we understood, but humans seemed willing to die for purely symbolic victories. They fought not to win, but to inflict maximum casualties on our forces. The most shocking discovery came when Zephyrian troops finally secured what remained of New Harmony's infrastructure. The humans had systematically destroyed everything of value before the invasion even began. They called it scorched earth, Cathvar said. Rather than allow us to benefit from conquest, they eliminated any possible gains. Food stores were poisoned. Machinery was sabotaged. Even the soil was contaminated with chemicals that would take decades to neutralize. So you gained nothing from the victory. Worse than nothing, Cathvar replied. We lost nearly 4,000 warriors, taking a world that provided no strategic value. The humans had turned their own planet into a weapon against us. News of New Harmony's fall spread through human space, but instead of discouraging resistance, it seemed to encourage other worlds to prepare similar defenses. Intelligence reports indicated that humans across their territory were studying Zephyrian tactics and developing countermeasures. We had given them a template for resistance, Cathvar realized. Every mistake we made on New Harmony would be waiting for us on the next world. The serving tray clattered as Brooks set down fresh water for both of them. Cathvar noticed his hands were shaking again and tried to control the tremor. 3 months into his testimony, and he still could not speak about certain battles without physical reaction. The siege of Luna Base was different from the planetary assaults, he began. This was conventional warfare against a prepared military installation. Our strategists believed it would restore our confidence after the disasters on the colony worlds. Luna Base orbited Earth's moon and served as humanity's primary military command center. Intelligence indicated it housed roughly 10,000 human soldiers and officers along with their most advanced weapon systems. High Command viewed its capture as essential to breaking human resistance. We committed 200,000 troops to the assault, Cathvar continued. The largest single operation in Zephyrian military history. Fleet Admiral Zorth himself commanded the attack from his flagship Vengeance of Stars. The human base was an impressive structure built into the moon's surface with multiple levels extending deep underground. Its defensive systems included orbital weapons platforms and fighter squadrons that had already proved troublesome during earlier engagements. Luna Base looked formidable, but our analysis showed critical weaknesses, Cathvar explained. Limited supply lines and no possibility of evacuation meant the defenders would be forced to surrender once we established a blockade. The siege began with conventional bombardment from long range. Zephyrian capital ships pounded the base's outer defenses while fighter craft engaged human squadrons in running battles above the lunar surface. For the first month, everything proceeded according to plan, Cathvar said. We destroyed most of their fighter craft and disabled several defensive installations. The humans were clearly outmatched and running low on supplies. But as the siege continued, Cathvar began to notice disturbing patterns in human behavior. Instead of conserving resources for a long defense, the humans seemed to be expending everything in increasingly desperate attacks. Their pilots began using suicide tactics, he explained. Damaged fighters would ram our ships instead of retreating, for repairs. The humans treated their own lives as expendable ammunition. Commander Ryan Phillips led the human defense, and his tactical decisions baffled Zephyrian analysts. Rather than concentrating his remaining forces for maximum defensive efficiency, Phillips spread them across multiple objectives that served no apparent strategic purpose. Phillips was either incompetent or insane, Cathvar said. He wasted resources on meaningless gestures while his situation grew more hopeless each day. The breakthrough seemed to come on day 60 when Zephyrian boarding parties finally penetrated the base's outer sections. Assault teams fought through corridors and chambers against fierce human resistance, but made steady progress toward the command center. We expected Phillips to surrender when his position became impossible, Cathvar continued. Standard military. Doctrine calls for preservation of personnel when defeat is inevitable. Instead, he opened communications with our fleet. The message Phillips transmitted was not a surrender offer, but a broadcast to Earth. Cathvar still remembered the human commanders. Words because they had been repeated countless times in post-battle analysis. Tell them we held, Phillips had said. Tell them we made it count. What did he mean by that? We did not understand at the time, Cathvar admitted. The humans were clearly defeated, and Phillips was simply engaging in pointless rhetoric. Our analysts dismissed it as psychological warfare aimed at maintaining morale. But in the days that followed, human behavior became even more inexplicable. Personnel who should have been evacuating to secure areas instead volunteered for missions that could only end in death. Engineer Patricia Wells sabotaged her own fusion reactor, Cathvar explained. She jury-rigged the containment systems to create a massive explosion that destroyed 3 levels of the base. She died in the blast along with 200 of our assault troops. Pilot Carlos Mendez crashed his damaged fighter directly into the bridge of the Zephyrian command ship. The attack killed Fleet Admiral Zorth and crippled fleet coordination at a critical moment in the siege. These were not tactical decisions, Cathvar said. They served no military purpose except to inflict casualties on our forces. The humans were using their own deaths as weapons. The siege dragged on for 4 months instead of the predicted 4 weeks. Every section of Luna Base had to be taken through brutal close combat against defenders who refused to retreat or surrender. Our casualties mounted beyond all expectations, Kethavar continued. We lost nearly 30,000 warriors taking a base that should have fallen in days. The humans made us pay for every corridor and every room. The most disturbing aspect was the effect on Zephyrian morale. Warriors who had fought bravely in previous campaigns began showing signs of combat stress and refusing assault orders. Our soldiers started to fear victory, Kethavar explained. Each success cost us more than defeat. The humans had somehow made winning feel like losing. Medical reports showed increasing numbers of Zephyrian troops suffering from what human psychologists called battle fatigue. Warriors experienced nightmares and anxiety attacks triggered by memories of human resistance. We began to understand that humans fight differently than any other species, Kethavar said. They do not calculate odds or preserve resources. They fight as if death is preferable to defeat. When Luna Base finally fell, the Zephyrian forces found something that chilled them more than the brutal combat. In the base's communications center, they discovered recordings of every battle and every human death. Phillips had documented everything, Kethavar whispered. Every sacrifice and every act of heroism was recorded and transmitted to Earth. The humans were turning their defeats into propaganda. The final message from Luna Base was not a surrender, but a challenge. Phillips had managed to broadcast final, words that reached every human world in their territory. He said that Luna Base had taught the galaxy something important. Kethavar continued, that humans do not fear death as much as their enemies fear killing them. The words spread through human space like wildfire. Instead of demoralizing other worlds, the fall of Luna Base seemed to inspire them to prepare even more desperate defenses. We had won a great victory, Kethavar said bitterly. We captured an important strategic position and eliminated a significant human military force. But somehow the humans had turned their defeat into our loss. Intelligence reports in the following weeks showed increased resistance activity across all human worlds. The siege of Luna Base had not broken human morale, but had somehow strengthened it. They learned from Phillips that defeat could be victory if it cost us enough, Kethavar explained. Every subsequent battle became more expensive for our forces, even when we won. The psychological impact on Zephyrian troops was profound and lasting. Many veterans of Luna Base required extended medical treatment and could not return to active duty. We began to realize that we were fighting an enemy that did not follow any known rules of warfare, Kethavar concluded. The humans had weaponized their own mortality and were using it against us. Brooks noticed that Kethavar had stopped eating the food provided to him. The alien warrior picked at his meal but seemed unable to swallow. She had seen this behavior before in soldiers suffering from severe trauma. The assault on Earth was our final gambit, Kethavar said without looking up from his untouched plate. High Command knew the war was turning against us, but retreat would have meant disgrace for the entire empire. By this point, the Zephyrian invasion force had been reduced to 800,000 troops from the original 1,000,000. Losses on colony worlds and during the Luna Base siege had eliminated their most experienced units. We committed everything to the Earth assault, he continued. Every remaining ship and every available warrior. The plan was to break human resistance by attacking their homeworld directly. The invasion began with orbital bombardment of major human cities. Zephyrian capital ships rained destruction on population centers, while assault transports prepared to land ground forces in coordinated strikes. Earth's defenses were stronger than expected, Kethavar admitted. Hidden weapon installations and underground bunkers that our intelligence had missed. The humans had been preparing for this battle since the war began. New York City became the site of the largest urban battle in galactic history. 200,000 Zephyrian troops landed in the metropolitan area, expecting to overwhelm human defenders through sheer numbers. Urban warfare was supposed to favor us, Kethvar explained. Our superior weapons and armor would dominate in close-quarters combat. The humans should have been helpless in their own cities. Instead, the Zephyrian forces found themselves fighting a nightmare campaign against an enemy that knew every building and every street. Human defenders turned the city into a deadly maze of ambushes and traps. Police officer Danny Cooper organized civilian resistance networks, Kethvar said. He coordinated attacks using the city's infrastructure against us. Every subway tunnel became a potential ambush site, and every skyscraper became a fortress. Cooper had no formal military training, but he understood urban combat in ways that surprised Zephyrian tacticians. He used the city's communication systems to coordinate resistance cells and share intelligence about enemy movements. Cooper turned ordinary citizens into effective fighters, Kethvar continued. Shop owners and office workers became snipers and saboteurs. The entire civilian population became combatants. Similar patterns emerged in London, where historian Dr. Margaret Foster used her knowledge of ancient siege warfare to organize devastating ambushes in the subway system. She studied historical battles and adapted medieval tactics for modern urban combat. Foster understood that cities are weapons if you know how to use them, Kethvar explained. She turned London's underground into a series of killing zones that channeled our forces into predetermined ambush sites. The breaking point came in a small town called Millbrook in the American state of Kansas. Kethvar's unit had cornered a group of human survivors in the local high school building. Intelligence indicated 23 humans, including several children, he said. They should have surrendered immediately when faced with overwhelming force. The group was led by school principal Robert Hayes and included students aged 15 to 18. When offered the chance to surrender, Hayes had responded with words that still haunted Kethvar's dreams. He said this was where they taught their children about courage, Kethvar whispered. He said it seemed like a good day for a final lesson. What followed was 7 hours of close combat that cost the Zephyrian forces an entire battalion. The humans fought from classroom to classroom using improvised weapons and knowledge of the building's layout. The children fought alongside the adults, Kethvar said. They should have been protected or evacuated, but instead they became soldiers. Your species arms its young and expects them to die for abstract concepts. Student Katie Sullivan used chemistry knowledge to create explosive devices from laboratory supplies. Teenager Ben Foster led flanking attacks through ventilation systems that allowed human defenders to strike from unexpected angles. These were not soldiers, Kethvar emphasized. They were students and teachers with no military training, yet they fought with skill and determination that matched our best warriors. The battle ended when the school building collapsed under sustained bombardment. Every human defender died, but they had broadcast their final stand across global communication networks. Hayes managed to transmit their last moments to the entire planet, Kethvar explained. Every human on Earth watched those children die fighting for their school. The broadcast had an immediate impact on human resistance movements. Uprisings began simultaneously in every occupied territory as civilians took up arms against Zephyrian forces. The message was clear, Kethvar said. If children could fight and die with such courage, then adults had no excuse for surrender. The psychological effect on Zephyrian troops was catastrophic. Many warriors refused orders to attack civilian targets after witnessing the Millbrook broadcast. Our soldiers began to question the morality of the war, Kethvar admitted. They had signed up to fight enemy soldiers, not to kill children in schools. Desertion rates increased dramatically as Zephyrian forces struggled to maintain discipline. Some units abandoned their positions entirely rather than continue fighting. Human civilians. The humans had turned their own deaths into propaganda weapons, Kethvar explained. Every defeat became a victory in the larger war for moral authority. Earth's resistance networks grew stronger, despite suffering heavy casualties. Human defenders seemed to multiply rather than diminish as the battle continued. For every human, "We killed 10 more took up arms," Kethvar said. "The families of the dead became our most dangerous enemies." The final phase of the Earth assault degenerated into isolated pockets of resistance that could not be eliminated. Zephyrian forces controlled territory but faced constant attack from human guerrillas. "We held the ground, but we did not control it," Kethvar explained. Every position required constant defense against human saboteurs and suicide attackers. Supply lines became impossible to maintain as human resistance fighters targeted Zephyrian logistics with increasing effectiveness. Transport convoys faced ambush on every road. "The humans understood that they could not defeat us in open battle," Kethvar said. "Instead, they made victory impossible by denying us the benefits of conquest. Medical casualties from combat stress began to exceed battle. Injuries as Zephyrian warriors suffered psychological breakdown. Many soldiers required evacuation for treatment of what human doctors called post-traumatic stress. We were winning every battle but losing the war," Kethvar concluded. The humans had somehow made victory feel like defeat. The Earth campaign lasted 6 months and cost the Zephyrian Empire nearly half their remaining forces. When it ended, they controlled empty cities filled with rubble and hostile civilians. "We had conquered a planet that provided no value," Kethvar said bitterly. "The humans had turned their own world into a weapon against us." Kethvar pushed back from the table and walked to the small window that showed the stars beyond. His reflection in the reinforced glass looked older than his actual age, and Brooks could see the weight of memory in his posture. Human resistance changed the fundamental nature of warfare, he said without turning around. Traditional Zephyrian tactics relied on intimidation and the preservation of valuable resources. Your species refused to be intimidated and systematically denied us any benefit from conquest. The war had dragged on for 2 years beyond the original 6-month projection. What should have been a simple conquest had become the Empire's greatest military disaster. New human leaders emerged who seemed to understand our psychology better than we understood yours. Kethvar continued. They developed tactics specifically, designed to exploit our weaknesses. Captain Nicole Turner had pioneered psychological warfare techniques that turned Zephyrian honor codes against them. She broadcast challenges that forced Empire commanders into disadvantageous engagements to preserve their reputation. Turner understood that we valued personal honor above tactical advantage, Kethvar explained. She would insult individual commanders by name and dare them to single combat. Our officers felt compelled to accept, even when logic demanded refusal. General Stephen Blake took a different approach by flooding Zephyrian communication networks with recordings of human resistance. Every successful ambush and every act of defiance was broadcast to Empire forces. Blake wanted our soldiers to see what they were fighting against, Kethvar said. He understood that warriors who respected their enemies would eventually refuse to kill them. The broadcasts showed human children building weapons from school supplies and elderly civilians creating chemical bombs from household materials. They documented acts of courage that impressed even hardened Zephyrian veterans. Blake made us see humans as individuals rather than targets, Kethvar admitted. It became harder to kill people whose names and families we knew. The most disturbing development was what humans called the multiplication effect. Each human death seemed to inspire multiple others to take up arms against the Empire. We intercepted communications between human families volunteering for suicide missions, Kethvar said. Parents would sacrifice themselves to avenge dead children. Children would become soldiers to honor fallen parents. The concept was incomprehensible to Zephyrian military doctrine, which emphasized preserving trained personnel for future campaigns. Humans seemed to view every death as an investment in eventual victory. Your species weaponized grief, Kethvar explained. Sorrow became anger, and anger became violence directed at our forces. Intelligence reports showed human resistance networks, growing stronger despite suffering massive casualties. For every cell destroyed, 2 more appeared to take its place. We began to realize that we were fighting an idea rather than an army, Kethvar said. Ideas cannot be killed with conventional weapons. The turning point came when human resistance forces coordinated simultaneous uprisings across 12 worlds. Commander Katie Sullivan and Colonel Ben Foster had somehow managed to synchronize attacks across light years of space. The coordination required was beyond anything we thought humans capable of, Kethvar admitted. Your species lacks the advanced communication technology that makes such operations possible. Yet somehow the humans had managed to time their attacks perfectly. Zephyrian garrisons found themselves under assault simultaneously across multiple star systems. Sullivan and Foster had created a network using captured Zephyrian equipment, Kethvar explained. They turned our own technology against us. The uprisings followed patterns developed during earlier resistance campaigns. Human fighters targeted supply lines and command structures while avoiding direct confrontation with superior forces. They fought smart wars designed to maximize our casualties while minimizing their own losses, Kethvar said. Every engagement was calculated to cost us more than we could afford. Morale among Zephyrian forces collapsed as news of the coordinated uprisings spread through the fleet. Warriors who had believed in certain victory began to question whether the war could be won. Our soldiers started to believe that humans were supernatural beings, Kethvar explained. How else could a primitive species resist the mighty Zephyrian Empire? Desertion rates reached critical levels as entire units abandoned their positions rather than face human resistance fighters. Some Zephyrian warriors actually joined human forces and fought against their former comrades. The humans welcomed defectors and treated them better than our own empire treated loyal soldiers, Kethvar said bitterly. They understood the value of psychological warfare. Supply problems became insurmountable as human saboteurs targeted Zephyrian logistics networks with increasing effectiveness. Transport ships faced constant attack, and many never reached their destinations. The humans had studied our supply chains and identified critical vulnerabilities, Kethvar explained. They knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Medical facilities overflowed with casualties suffering from combat stress and psychological trauma. Many Zephyrian warriors required extensive treatment and could never return to active duty. We were creating more damaged soldiers than effective fighters, Kethvar admitted. The war was destroying our military from within. Strategic resources became impossible to obtain as human resistance networks targeted mining operations and manufacturing facilities. The war economy began to collapse under sustained attack. Humans understood that they did not need to defeat our armies if they could destroy our ability to supply them, Kethvar said. They fought a war of economic attrition. High command faced impossible choices as casualties mounted and resources dwindled. Continue the war and risk total military collapse, or withdraw and face political disgrace. The Empire had committed too much to simply abandon the campaign, Kethvar explained, but continuing meant certain destruction of our remaining forces. Intelligence reports showed human resistance growing stronger rather than weaker as the war progressed. What should have been a weakening enemy was becoming more dangerous over time. We finally understood that we were not fighting humans, Kethvar said quietly. We were fighting human nature itself, and that was a war we could never win. The revelation came too late to save the Zephyrian invasion force. 3 years of brutal warfare had reduced 1 million warriors to fewer than 100,000 effective troops. By the time our leaders accepted reality, the war was already lost, Kethvar concluded. The humans had taught us that some enemies become stronger when attacked. The recording device had been running for 6 hours, and Brooks could see exhaustion in every line of Kethvar's reptilian features. The alien warrior had relived 3 years of warfare in a single day, and the experience had clearly taken its toll. "Tell me about the end," she said softly. Kethvar returned to his seat and stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "The Zephyrian Empire sued for peace on the 3rd anniversary of the invasion," he began. What was supposed to be a 6-month conquest had become a nightmare that consumed 90% of our military forces. High Command had finally accepted what field commanders had known for months. The war against humanity was unwinnable, and continuing would mean the complete destruction of the Empire's ability to defend itself. Emperor Zolth himself transmitted the surrender request. Kethvar continued. The most powerful being in our civilization, begging primitive humans for mercy. The peace negotiations took place on a neutral coalition world with representatives from both species. Kethvar had been present as a military advisor, though his primary role was to provide testimony about human combat capabilities. "Your negotiators were surprisingly generous," he admitted. "They could have demanded territory or reparations, but instead asked only for recognition of human sovereignty and a promise of non-aggression." The human delegates seemed more interested in understanding Zephyrian motivations than punishing the Empire for its invasion. They asked detailed questions about military doctrine and strategic planning. They wanted to know why we had attacked in the first place, Kethvar explained. It was as if they were studying us the same way we had studied them before the war. The peace treaty included provisions for medical treatment of Zephyrian veterans suffering from combat trauma. Human physicians offered to share their expertise in treating what they called post-traumatic stress disorder. "Your doctors understood our condition better than our own healers," Kethvar said. "They had experience treating soldiers who fought impossible wars." The psychological impact on surviving Zephyrian warriors was profound and lasting. Many could not return to normal military service and required extensive rehabilitation. "We called it the human curse," Kethvar explained. "Warriors who had fought your species became unable to function in traditional combat roles. Some veterans experienced nightmares and anxiety attacks triggered by memories of human resistance. Others suffered from guilt over their participation in what they now viewed as an unjust war. The humans had changed us in ways we did not understand," Kethvar continued. "They made us question fundamental assumptions about warfare and morality. Military doctrine throughout the Empire had to be completely restructured to account for what strategists called human-type resistance. Traditional conquest techniques were abandoned in favor of diplomatic solutions. No Zephyrian commander wanted to face another enemy like humanity," Kethvar admitted. "The cost was too high and the benefits too small." Brooks leaned forward and asked the question that had been troubling her throughout the testimony. What made humans different from other species the Empire conquered? Kethvar was quiet for a long time before answering. "Other species fight to live," he said finally. "They calculate odds and preserve resources for future battles. They surrender when defeat becomes inevitable because survival is more important than victory. And humans fight to ensure their ideals survive their deaths," Kethvar replied. "They weaponize their own mortality and use it against their enemies." The concept had no equivalent in Zephyrian culture, where individual survival was considered the highest good. Soldiers were expected to retreat when faced with overwhelming odds and live to fight another day. "Your species treats death as just another tactical option," Kethvar explained. "When conventional weapons fail, you use your own lives as ammunition." The psychological effect on enemy forces was devastating because it violated fundamental assumptions about rational behavior. No military doctrine could account for an enemy willing to die for abstract principles. "We could not develop effective countermeasures against human tactics," Kethvar admitted. How do you fight someone who considers death a victory? Intelligence reports from the war had been studied by military academies throughout the galaxy. Human resistance techniques were analyzed and documented, but no effective responses had been developed. Other species have tried to copy human tactics, HFY said, but they lack the cultural foundation that makes such sacrifice meaningful. Brooks made notes while considering the implications of HFY's testimony. If humanity joined the coalition, its military contributions could be significant, but its methods might disturb other member species. Do you have any final observations about the war? She asked. HFY looked directly at her for the first time in hours. Commander Brooks, I must give you a warning, he said seriously. The coalition views humanity as primitive barbarians who got lucky against a superior force. What would you tell them? That they are making the same mistake we made, HFY replied. Humans are not primitive. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy because they fight for things more important than their own lives. The Galactic Coalition faced potential threats from several hostile civilizations, including the Void-Touched and the Machine Collective. Traditional military forces had proved inadequate against these enemies. If the coalition ever faces an existential threat, pray that humanity stands with you, HFY said quietly, because if they stand against you, not even your gods can save you. The session ended with HFY being escorted back to his quarters while Brooks compiled her report. The alien warrior's testimony would influence coalition policy regarding human membership. What will happen to me now? HFY asked before leaving. That depends on the Coalition Council, Brooks replied. Your cooperation has been valuable and will be considered during sentencing. HFY nodded and walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Commander, there is one more thing you should know about humans. What is that? They forgive their enemies, he said with something like wonder in his voice. No other species in the galaxy shows mercy to those who have wronged them. Brooks completed her report 3 days later with a recommendation for immediate full membership status for humanity, along with special consideration for military alliance protocols. The testimony of a broken alien warrior had convinced her that humans would be valuable allies. The Coalition Council approved human membership unanimously after reviewing HFY's testimony. Earth was welcomed into the galactic community with full rights and responsibilities. HFY was sentenced to rehabilitation rather than imprisonment, and eventually became a consultant on human military tactics. He spent his remaining years helping other species understand what made humanity unique among the stars.